She was a waitress buried under a mountain of medical debt, a ghost haunting the opulent halls of a world she could only serve, never join. He was a titan of finance, a man so powerful and private he was known only as the Black Wolf of Wall Street, a predator who built an empire on numbers and trusted no one. One crisp autumn evening, a meticulously crafted dish, a symbol of his wealth, became a near-fatal miscalculation. The one person who could decipher the puzzle wasn't his entourage of experts. It was the invisible girl pouring his water. But when she saved his life, his reaction wasn't a tearful thank you. It was a cold, calculating analysis, and the reward he offered wasn't a check to solve her problems, but a contract that would plunge her into the heart of his corrupt dynasty, forcing her to become either its savior or its final victim. The chandeliers at the Sovereign Steakhouse didn't just drip crystal. They dripped judgment. Each prism caught the light and cast it down on the patrons, illuminating the flawless carats on their fingers and the quiet confidence of inherited wealth. For Clara Rossi, a 24-year-old with the weary eyes of someone twice her age, the light felt less like an illumination and more like an interrogation. It highlighted the faint fraying on the cuff of her starched white shirt, a shirt she'd painstakingly bleached in the sink of her cramped Queen's apartment. The Sovereign was not a restaurant. It was a kingdom of carnivores, a place where billion-dollar deals were sealed over $400 slabs of Wagyu beef. The air, thick with the scent of seared fat and aged Scotch, was a perfume Clara could never afford. Her world was a different kind of scent, the antiseptic smell of the clinic where her mother, Elena, received her Parkinson's treatments, and the metallic tang of fear that rose in her throat every time she opened a bill. That fear had a number, 100 to 12,450. It was the sum total of her mother's care, a figure that had derailed Clara's life, forcing her out of her accounting program at Baruch College and into this relentless cycle of double shifts. Her dream of becoming a CPA, of finding elegance in the balanced columns of a ledger, had been replaced by the brutal arithmetic of survival, calculating whether a 25% tip on table 4 would cover the copay for her mother's levodopa prescription this week. Rossi, table 7 needs more of the 98 Bordeaux, and they're complaining about the chill from the vent, hissed Antoine, the maitre d', a man whose perfectly sculpted goatee seemed to sharpen with every criticism he delivered. And for God's sake, your posture. You're not carrying laundry. You're presenting an experience. Yes, Antoine. Sorry, Antoine, Clara murmured, the words a familiar, tasteless refrain. She moved through the dining room with a practiced grace that belied the ache in her feet. Desperation was an excellent teacher of efficiency, but Clara had a secret weapon, beyond speed, and a polite smile. She had a mind that saw the world in numbers and patterns. It was a curse when calculating her debt, but a gift in this gilded jungle. She wasn't just a waitress. She was an unintentional data analyst. She knew the hedge fund manager at table 3 always ordered the bone-in ribeye, medium rare, and would send it back if the sear wasn't a specific shade of mahogany. She knew the couple at table 11 was having an affair. Their orders were always charged to 2 different corporate cards, both with addresses in Connecticut, but in different towns. She saw the subtle tells, the repeated numbers, the deviations from the norm. This skill, this obsessive attention to detail, was her shield. It allowed her to anticipate a request, to refill a glass before it was empty, to be the perfect, invisible servant whose flawless service coaxed out the tips that kept the lights on. Tonight, a low, persistent hum of anxiety thrummed beneath the surface of the dining room's calm. The source was table 15, the most secluded booth, nestled in an alcove and shielded by velvet curtains. It was the throne room, reserved for gods of finance and industry. As she passed, Clara caught a snippet of conversation from two other waitstaff whispering by the service station. "It's him. Blackwood is here." "No way. He hasn't been seen in public for years." Clara's blood chilled. Silas Blackwood. The name was a legend, a boogeyman for Wall Street competitors, a ruthless investor who'd built a multi-billion-dollar empire, Blackwood Capital, from nothing. He was infamous for two things: his almost supernatural ability to spot patterns in the market that no one else could, and his extreme, paranoid reclusiveness. He was in his early 80s, a phantom who ran the world from a sterile penthouse office and trusted no one, least of all his own family. Just then, Antoine marched towards her, his face an unnatural shade of pale. "Rossi, Henderson just spilled an entire tray of martinis on the mayor's wife. You're taking table 15. Clara froze. "Me?" "Yes, you," he snapped. "You're the only one I trust not to trip over your own feet. Listen to me. Do not speak. Do not make eye contact unless he initiates. He has a security man and a private medic with him at all times. Give the order to the security man, not to Mr. Blackwood. Do you understand? Your only job is to be silent and swift." Beside Antoine stood a man who seemed carved from granite. He wore a simple dark suit that probably cost more than Clara's annual income, and an earpiece was coiled discreetly into his ear. His eyes swept the room with a cold, professional detachment. This was Garrett, Blackwood's head of security, a figure as legendary and feared as his boss. "Miss Rossi," Garrett's voice was low and calm, like a river flowing over stones. "Mr. Blackwood has a severe, life-threatening allergy to all shellfish. I have personally inspected the kitchen. His meal will be the dry-aged New York strip, pan-seared, no butter, no sauce. Steamed asparagus, plain. A bottle of still water, Evian, unopened. Do not deviate. Do not offer him anything else. Acknowledge." "Yes, sir. I understand," Clara said, her voice a squeak. Her hands trembled as she picked up a silver tray with a single, sealed bottle of water. This wasn't just a VIP. This was a man whose net worth could solve the healthcare crisis of a small country. She felt the crushing weight of his importance as she pushed through the velvet curtain. He was older than the decade-old file photos suggested, and thinner, but his presence filled the space. Silas Blackwood sat ramrod straight, his face a mask of stern concentration, as he studied a complex financial report spread on the table. A vintage Patek Philippe watch, a masterpiece of understated mechanics, was the only ornament on his person. He didn't look up. He didn't acknowledge her existence. She was just another moving part in his meticulously controlled environment. She placed the water on the table, her movements precise and silent. He grunted, a sound of dismissal. Humiliation burned on her cheeks as she retreated. This was her place in the world, a ghost at the feast of kings. The meal proceeded in monastic silence. She delivered the steak, cooked to the exact specifications. She cleared the plate. He never spoke, never looked up. Garrett stood like a sentinel near the curtain, his eyes missing nothing. The private medic, a young, serious-looking man, sat in an adjacent booth, a black leather bag at his feet. The ordeal was nearly over. All that was left was to clear the final plate and present the check, which Garrett would handle. Clara approached the table one last time. "Sir, may I take this for you?" she asked softly. Annoyed by the interruption, Silas Blackwood looked up. His eyes were a startlingly pale blue, like a winter sky, and they held the cold fire of a man used to absolute obedience. He opened his mouth, not to answer, but to dismiss her with a sharp command. but the words never came. Instead, a strange, guttural sound escaped his throat. A look of confusion, then profound panic, washed over his face. His hand, thin and mottled with age, went to his chest. He wasn't choking in the traditional sense. There was no blockage. His breathing became rapid and shallow, a horrifying, wheezing sound. "Sir?" Garrett lunged forward. "Mr. Blackwood!" The medic rushed to the table, snapping open his bag. "It's a reaction. Must have been cross-contamination. His pressure is dropping." Blackwood's face was turning a ghastly, dusky grey. His speech was slurring as he tried to speak. Not shellfish," he managed to gasp, his eyes wide with terror. "Classic anaphylaxis," the medic said, pulling out a pre-filled syringe. "I'm administering the standard EpiPen for shellfish reaction." "Wait!" The word burst from Clara's lips before she could stop it. All three men, Garrett, the medic, and the dying billionaire, turned to stare at her. "Get back, miss," Garrett commanded, his professional calm cracking. "It's not the shellfish," Clara said, her heart hammering against her ribs. Her brain was on fire, flipping through the data of the evening with frantic speed. The order, the kitchen, the ingredients. "He didn't have any shellfish. You checked the kitchen yourself." "Cross-contamination happens," the medic retorted, his hand shaking as he uncapped the needle. "We don't have time to debate." "No, you don't understand," Clara insisted, stepping closer, her voice rising with an urgency that surprised even herself. "When I was in the kitchen, I heard Chef Dubois talking to a purveyor. He got a new shipment of imported shiitake mushrooms. He was experimenting with it, grinding it into a fine powder to use as a garnish, an umami dust for the steaks." The medic stared at her, dumbfounded. "Mushrooms? So what?" "I read a study," Clara said, the words tumbling out. She remembered it from a late-night study session, a random article she'd clicked on about cellular biology. "It's rare, but there's a documented molecular cross-reactivity. The protein chitin in some mushrooms can mimic the tropomyosin in shellfish for a small subset of the allergic population. It presents just like anaphylaxis, but can be more aggressive. The standard epinephrine dose might not be enough. He needs a different protocol, maybe a broad-spectrum antihistamine IV push first." Silence. The medic froze, the syringe poised over Blackwood's thigh. Garrett stared at her, his face a mask of disbelief. Silas Blackwood, his breath now coming in ragged, whistling gasps, locked his pale blue eyes on hers. In them, she saw not just fear, but a flicker of intense, analytical thought. He was dying, and he was processing what she'd just said. "The dust." Blackwood wheezed, his gaze shifting to a few dark specks remaining on the edge of his plate. The medic looked from the plate to Clara, then back to his bag. The seconds stretched into an eternity. He made a decision. He dropped the standard EpiPen and fumbled for a larger vial and a new syringe. She could be right. We need to treat for a systemic inflammatory response, not just a standard allergic one. He worked with frantic precision, plunging a new needle into an IV port he quickly established in Blackwood's arm. As the drugs flooded the billionaire's system, the terrifying wheezing began to subside. Color, faint at first, then more pronounced, returned to his face. He took a deep, shuddering breath. Then another. The restaurant was oblivious, shielded by the velvet curtain. Inside this small, private world, a waitress had just contradicted a medical professional and saved the life of one of the world's richest men. Not with physical action, but with a piece of obscure, remembered information. As paramedics, summoned discreetly by Garrett, arrived to transport him to the hospital, Silas Blackwood was bundled onto a gurney. He was weak and disoriented, but his mind was clearly working. As they wheeled him away, his eyes never left Clara. There was no warmth, no gratitude. There was only a chilling, piercing stare of profound disbelief and intense calculation. He had been vulnerable, his life saved by a variable he could never have predicted. The memory of a waitress. He didn't say thank you. He said nothing at all. Clara was left standing in the alcove, her knees weak. The curtain was swept aside, and there stood Antoine, his face a thundercloud of pure fury. "My office," he seethed, his voice barely a whisper. "Now." Antoine's office was a small, windowless box, but it felt like a grand inquisitor's chamber. "Do you have any earthly idea what you have just done?" he began, his voice dangerously low. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving Clara shaky and confused. I think I helped him. He was having a reaction." "You interfered with a medical professional." Antoine slammed his hand on the desk. "You, a waitress, presumed to know more than Mr. Blackwood's private physician. We have protocols, Miss Rossi. We stay silent. We call for help. We do not play doctor and risk a multi-billion-dollar lawsuit." "But he was dying," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "The medic listened to me. It worked." "That is irrelevant," Antoine spat. "The liability you have exposed this establishment to is astronomical. What if you had been wrong? What if your rare mushroom theory had delayed the proper treatment and he had died? His family would own this building and everything in it. They would own you." He straightened his tie, his face a mask of cold, corporate self-preservation. "You created a risk. You overstepped your station. You are a danger to our clientele." He opened a drawer and pulled out a termination form, already filled out. "You are fired, effective immediately. Your final paycheck will be mailed to you. Give me your apron and locker key." The injustice was a physical blow, knocking the air from her lungs. She had saved a life, and her reward was unemployment. She was being punished not for being wrong, but for daring to be right in a world where her opinion was worthless. Numbly, she untied the apron, the symbol of her servitude, and placed it on his desk. A security guard escorted her out the back entrance, into a grimy alley smelling of stale grease and despair. The heavy steel door clicked shut behind her, a final metallic sound of exile. The subway ride back to Queens was a blur of fluorescent lights and other tired faces. She walked into her apartment to the soft sound of her mother's unsteady breathing from the bedroom. On the kitchen table, a stack of mail waited. On top was a letter from the insurance company, a stark white envelope containing its usual brand of sterile cruelty. It was a denial of coverage for a new experimental drug that might slow her mother's tremors. Reason for denial. Not medically necessary at this stage. Clara sank onto a wobbly kitchen chair, the termination form in one hand and the insurance denial in the other. She had been a ghost in a rich man's world, and for one brief, shining moment, she had become visible. She had made a difference, and the world had slapped her back into invisibility and failure with brutal efficiency. She put her head down on the worn Formica tabletop, and for the first time in a long time, allowed herself to cry. 3 days passed in a fog of job applications and quiet desperation. The online portals for diners, coffee shops, and office temp agencies were a black hole from which nothing returned. Her savings account, a laughable 3-figure number, was dwindling. Her mother, sensing her daughter's despair, tried to be encouraging, her words slightly slurred by her condition. "Something good will come. Cara mia, you have a good heart." On the 4th day, a Saturday afternoon, The intercom buzzed. It was a long, insistent sound, not the quick buzz of a delivery person. Clara ignored it. It buzzed again, longer this time. With a sigh, she pressed the talk button. Yes? Miss Clara Rossi. A familiar, calm voice resonated through the cheap speaker. This is Garrett. I am downstairs. Mr. Blackwood requests your presence. Clara's heart seized. They were suing her. Antoine was right. She was going to lose everything, what little she had. I can't. I don't have a lawyer. This is not a legal matter, Miss Rossi. Garrett's voice was impassive. It is a business one. A car is waiting. Panic warred with a sliver of curiosity. She threw on the nicest clothes she owned, a pair of simple black slacks and a faded blue blouse, and descended the creaky stairs. Parked in front of her crumbling apartment building was a car that didn't belong in this universe. It was a black Maybach, a silent, gleaming behemoth that made the dented sedans on her street look like children's toys. Her neighbors were staring from their windows. Garrett stood by the open rear door. He regarded her simple attire without expression. Miss Rossi. The ride downtown was silent and surreal. They didn't go to a hospital or a law firm. They pulled into a private underground garage beneath a sleek, black skyscraper in the financial district. The elevator ascended without a sound, opening directly into an office that was less a room and more an extension of the sky. 3 walls were floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a god's-eye view of Manhattan. The furniture was sparse, brutally modern, and exquisitely expensive. It was the office of a man who valued power and clarity above all else. And there he was. Silas Blackwood sat behind a vast, empty desk of polished obsidian. He was not in a suit, but in a simple, dark grey cashmere sweater. He looked rested, the ghastly colour gone. But his pale eyes had lost none of their intensity. He gestured to a single, stark chair opposite his desk. Garrett remained by the door, a silent statue. Miss Rossi, Blackwood began, his voice a dry rasp, but firm. Sit. She sat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. He stared at her for a long, uncomfortable minute, his eyes dissecting her. My doctors have confirmed your hypothesis, a rare chitin-tropomyosin cross-reaction. They are writing a paper on it. On me. He paused. They tell me that if my physician had administered the standard treatment for a shellfish reaction, the massive dose of epinephrine without a preceding antihistamine would likely have sent me into cardiac arrest. You did not simply help, Miss Rossi. You saved my life. Clara swallowed. I'm glad you're okay, sir. Are you? He countered, his eyes narrowing. Or are you glad because you anticipate a reward? A check? A thank you to solve your problems? The question was cold, clinical. It was a test. No, sir, she said, finding a flicker of her own resolve. I'm glad because my mother is sick, and I know what it's like to watch someone you love suffer. I wouldn't wish that on anyone. He considered her answer, his expression unreadable. I had you investigated, he stated flatly. Clara Rossi, 24. Dropped out of the accounting program at Baruch, 4.0 GPA. Your mother, Elena Rossi, Parkinson's disease. Your outstanding medical debt is $112,450. You were fired from the Sovereign for gross insubordination. He had all the data points of her life. I see, she whispered. No, you don't, he said, leaning forward slightly. I've spent 60 years building an empire based on one principle, identifying value where others see nothing. I look at a stock chart, I see a pattern. I look at a company's balance sheet, I see a weakness. For decades, I have surrounded myself with the best minds money can buy, MBAs from Harvard, PhDs from MIT, doctors from Johns Hopkins. And in a moment of crisis, all their expertise, all their pedigrees, were worthless. They saw what they expected to see. You saw what was actually there. He steepled his fingers. My life's work, my legacy, is Blackwood Capital and its philanthropic arm, the Blackwood Foundation. The foundation alone controls over $20 billion. It is run by my son, Marcus, and his associate, Miss Isabel Vance, and I believe they are robbing me blind. The confession hung in the air, cold and heavy. They are charming, intelligent, and utterly without scruples, Blackwood continued. They run the foundation like their personal slush fund, funneling money into shell corporations disguised as charitable grants. I know it. I feel it in the numbers. But the accounting is perfect. The paper trails are clean. They are too smart. I have sent in 3 of the best forensic accounting firms in the country. They found nothing, because they too see what they expect to see. He leaned back, his pale eyes pinning her to the chair. But you, Miss Rossi, you don't see what you're supposed to. You see the umami dust. You see the tiny detail that unravels the entire story. You have a mind that is not just trained, it is inherently analytical and uncorrupted by expectation. What are you asking, sir? Clara's voice was barely audible. I am not asking. I am offering. I am creating a new position within the Blackwood Foundation, effective immediately. Senior Financial Analyst in the office of the chairman. The salary is $250,000 a year. Your mother will be enrolled in my personal executive health plan with access to any specialist, any treatment, anywhere in the world, fully covered. Your outstanding debt will be paid in full by noon on Monday. Clara felt the floor drop out from under her. It was a life raft, a miracle, a fantasy. That, however, is not your real job, Blackwood said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Your real job is to work for me, and only me. You will have access to everything, every grant proposal, every invoice, every wire transfer. You will sit in that office, and you will use that brain of yours. You will observe. You will find my umami dust. You will find the proof I need to expose my son and reclaim my legacy. You will be my ghost, my secret weapon. He saw the fear and hesitation in her eyes. This is not a reward, Miss Rossi. It's a contract. It will be dangerous. My son is a fool, but Isabel Vance is a viper. They will see you as a threat. They will try to destroy you. Most people would run from this. But my investigation suggests you are not most people. You are a fighter who has been given the wrong weapons. I am offering you an arsenal. Clara thought of her mother. She thought of the insurance letters, the endless worry, the suffocating weight of it all. This wasn't just money. It was freedom. It was a chance to fight back, not just for herself, but for this strange, ruthless old man who saw her not as a waitress, but as a mind. Why me? She asked, the question genuine. You could hire anyone. Because you can't be bought with money, Miss Rossi, Silas Blackwood said, a flicker of something almost like a smile touching his lips. I'm already offering you everything you could want. Your loyalty, therefore, will be to the puzzle itself, and that is a purity I can trust. He slid a single piece of paper and a heavy gold pen across the obsidian desk. The question is, do you trust yourself? The offices of the Blackwood Foundation were designed to soothe the conscience. Located in a pre-war building overlooking Central Park, the space was a symphony of cream-colored carpets, modern art chosen for its inoffensiveness, and smiling receptionists. It was a place built to convince the world and itself that it was doing good. Clara started on Monday, dressed in a charcoal grey suit that Garrett had arranged to be delivered. It felt like a costume for a play she hadn't rehearsed. Her title, Senior Financial Analyst, Office of the Chairman, was both a shield and a target. It granted her access, but painted a massive bullseye on her back. She met them on her first day. Marcus Blackwood was his father's opposite, tall, handsome, with an easy charm that felt manufactured. He had his father's intelligence, but none of his discipline, all of it curdled into a resentful entitlement. "Clara, welcome aboard," he said, shaking her hand with practiced warmth. "We were so thrilled when Dad told us he was bringing in someone with fresh eyes. We're a family here." Beside him stood Isabel Vance. She was sharp and elegant, dressed in a sheath dress that radiated power. Her smile was a work of art, beautiful and utterly devoid of warmth. She was the intellect, the strategist behind Marcus's charm. "It's a pleasure to have you," Isabel said, her eyes scanning Clara's off-the-rack suit with faint, dismissive amusement. "You'll be working primarily on the Inner City Arts Initiative. It's one of our flagship programs. I'll have my assistant send you the files. We're all very proud of the work we do here." They saw her as a curiosity, a pet project of the old man. They gave her a small, glass-walled office and a mountain of digital files. It was busy work, meant to keep her occupied and out of the way. But to Clara, it was a treasure trove. For 2 weeks, she worked 16-hour days, fueled by coffee and a lifetime of pent-up ambition. She did what they asked, reviewing grant proposals and summarizing reports. But at night, she dug deeper. She was the perfect ghost. She was quiet, polite, and unassuming. She watched. She listened. And she saw the patterns. It wasn't one big act of fraud. It was 1,000 tiny cuts. A grant for an after-school music program where the money was wired not to the school, but to a musical instrument supplier, an LLC that Clara discovered was registered to a P.O. box in Delaware. An invoice for a charity gala where the event planning fee, paid to a company called Vance Strategic Solutions, was exactly 40% of the total budget. The masterpiece of their deception was a project called the Phoenix Initiative. It was a program designed to give seed funding to tech startups in disadvantaged neighborhoods. On paper, it was brilliant. But Clara noticed a pattern in the funding. Every quarter, the largest grant, always just under the amount that required a full board review, went to a different startup. But when she traced the corporate registrations of these startups, she found they were all different branches of the same parent company, a holding firm called Argent Innovations. And the money never stayed with the startups. It was funneled upwards to Argent as management and consulting fees. This was it. This was the umami dust. Argent Innovations was their primary vehicle for siphoning millions. But she still couldn't connect it directly to Marcus or Isabel. The ownership was hidden behind layers of offshore accounts and proxy directors. She had the pattern, but not the signature. Her reports to Silas, delivered via encrypted messages to Garrett, were meticulous. "They are using a daisy chain of LLCs," she wrote. "The money moves so fast, through so many accounts it becomes invisible. I need access to the central server logs. I need to see the IP addresses that authorized these transfers." The access was granted silently the next day. Late one night, with the office empty and the city lights twinkling below, Clara logged into the Foundation's core server. She began cross-referencing the wire transfers to Argent Innovations with the user logs. The transfers were always authorized by a junior accountant, a man named Peterson. It was a dead end. But Clara didn't stop there. She looked at the timestamps. The transfers always happened at 2:15 a.m. Who works at 2:15 a.m. to approve routine grants? Then she checked the IP addresses. They weren't from the office. They weren't even from Peterson's home address, which she'd found in the employee file. The IP address traced back to a luxury high-rise in Tribeca. A quick search showed the penthouse belonged to one Isabel Vance. It was a remote login. They were using a low-level employee's credentials to authorize the transfers from Isabel's apartment in the dead of night. It was arrogant. It was sloppy. It was the proof. She quickly took screenshots, encrypting the files and saving them to a secure thumb drive. As she was logging out, a shadow fell over her desk. "Burning the midnight oil, Clara?" Isabel Vance stood in the doorway of her office, holding a briefcase. She must have forgotten it. Her friendly mask was gone. Her face was cold, her eyes narrowed with suspicion. "I was just finishing up the quarterly review for the Arts Initiative," Clara said, her heart pounding. She tried to close the server window, but it was too late. Isabel's gaze flickered to the screen, to the rows of IP addresses and transfer logs. She didn't need to understand the details. She saw the name Argent Innovations, and she saw the look on Clara's face. Isabel's expression didn't change, but a chill fill. The chill in the room was not a matter of temperature. It was an atmospheric pressure drop, a sudden void where the thin veneer of civility had been. Isabel Vance's smile did not falter, but it became something else entirely, a rictus of polished predation. The light from the city below caught in her eyes, and for a moment they looked like chips of black glass. "You're a truly diligent worker, Clara," she said, her voice a low, melodic threat. My father-in-law had a saying, a rather crude one he picked up in his early days. "The rats that stay quiet are the ones chewing through the floorboards." You should get some rest. You look positively consumed by your work. She turned, and the soft, expensive click of her heels on the marble floor was not a sound of departure. It was the cocking of a hammer. Each step was a measured beat, a countdown. Clara's heart hammered in her chest, a frantic counter-rhythm. War had not been declared. It had simply been revealed. The following morning was a study in controlled demolition. Clara's access card blinked a defiant red at the turnstile. Her email account was locked. Her phone, provided by the Foundation, was a dead brick. The corporate edifice had excommunicated her with the silent, brutal efficiency of a body rejecting a foreign cell. Garrett was waiting in the lobby, his face a mask of granite, but his eyes conveyed the gravity of the storm that had broken. "They moved faster than we anticipated," he said, his voice a low rumble that cut through the lobby's hushed chaos. "Mark has convened an emergency board meeting. It's in 2 hours. The agenda is singular: gross financial malfeasance and corporate espionage. Your name is the only item under discussion." The world tilted. "I have the proof," Clara whispered, her hand instinctively going to her coat pocket, where the thumb drive felt both as small as a pebble and as heavy as an anchor. "The IPs, the timestamps, and they have a narrative," Garrett countered, guiding her toward a quiet alcove away from prying eyes. "A far more compelling one for men who think in terms of pedigree and betrayal. They've manufactured an entire digital history. Emails, backdated, showing you in contact with a competitor. Text messages offering Foundation secrets. They're not just firing you, Miss Rossi. They're erasing you. They'll paint you as an ungrateful stray who bit the hand that fed her. They will allege you found the Phoenix Initiative, a program they will now champion as their own brilliant, if slightly unorthodox, philanthropic venture, and attempted to use it for blackmail. Your discovery will be presented as the motive for your crime." The architecture of the trap was breathtaking in its cruelty. They were using her own discovery, her umami dust, as the poison to destroy her. The very thing that proved her value would be twisted into proof of her guilt. She was a waitress again, accused of stealing the silverware. And Mr. Blackwood? The question was a fragile thread of hope. Garrett's expression tightened. Confined. Marcus has invoked a full medical power of attorney, citing cognitive decline and undue influence. He's presented a letter from a new physician, undoubtedly paid for, stating your presence causes Mr. Blackwood severe agitation. He's been medically imprisoned in his own home. He can't reach us, and we can't reach him. She was utterly, terrifyingly alone. The Maybach, the suit, the title, they were all a costume, and it had been ripped away. Beneath it, she was just Clara Rossi from Queens, with a mountain of debt and a sick mother, pitted against a dynasty. The fear that washed over her was cold and familiar. It was the fear of the eviction notice, of the insurance denial letter. It was the fear of powerlessness. For a moment, flight was a siren song. She could disappear. Take the thumb drive and run. But where? Back to a life of double shifts and quiet desperation? The thought was a suffocation. Isabel's words echoed in her mind. The rats that stay quiet. No. She had been quiet her whole life. She had chewed through the floorboards and seen the rot in the foundation of the house. She couldn't pretend it wasn't there. I'm going to that meeting, she said, the words surprising her with their solidity. Garrett looked at her, a flicker of something, respect, perhaps, in his stoic eyes. They've ordered you to attend, he said. They want their pound of flesh in person. Good, Clara said, a strange, cold calm settling over her. Let them. The Thaddeus Blackwood Memorial Conference Room was a temple to old money and masculine power. A 40-foot slab of mahogany, polished to a mirror shine, dominated the space. The walls were lined with oil portraits of stern-faced men, Blackwoods of generations past. The air itself felt heavy, smelling of leather, lemon polish, and the quiet, unassailable confidence of the ruling class. Clara was seated at the far end of the table, a defendant in an undeclared trial. The board members, a collection of silver-haired executives and society doyens, regarded her with expressions ranging from pity to contempt. Marcus stood at the head of the table, a paragon of sorrowful duty. Isabel sat to his right, a vision of somber elegance, her black dress a signal of mourning for the integrity she was about to assassinate. It is with a heart heavier than any of you can know, Marcus began, his voice catching with practiced emotion, that I must bring this matter before you. We have been betrayed. Betrayed by someone my father, in his declining generosity, saw fit to elevate. Clara Rossi has used her access, her privileged position, to attempt to extort and defraud this foundation, the very institution built by my grandfather to serve the public good. It was a masterful performance. Isabel took the floor, her presentation as sleek and deadly as a stiletto. She projected the fabricated emails onto the massive screen at the end of the room, the fake text messages, a doctored timeline. She spoke of Clara as a troubled, grasping young woman, overwhelmed by a world she didn't understand, lashing out. She built a cage of circumstantial evidence and plausible lies, and with each word, she locked another bar into place around Clara. This is a tragedy, one board member, a man named Sterling, intoned gravely when she had finished. A clear violation of trust. A vote is required, all in favor of the immediate termination of Miss Rossi and the pressing of full criminal charges. This vote is a violation of fiduciary duty. The voice crackled through a small, unobtrusive speaker on the conference table. It was weak, threaded with the rasp of illness, but it carried the unmistakable weight of absolute command. Every head in the room swiveled toward the screen, which until now had been displaying the Foundation's logo. It flickered, then resolved into a tight shot of Silas Blackwood's face. He was propped up in a medical bed, tubes visible at his nose, but his pale blue eyes were burning with a terrifying lucidity. He had found a way through, a back channel, a hidden door. Of course he had. He had built the damn house. "Father," Marcus sputtered, his face draining of all color. "The doctors. You're not well. This is highly irregular." "What is irregular?" Silas's voice cut through the air like a shard of ice. "Is a son who imprisons his own father to conceal his crimes. I am perfectly well enough to identify a viper in my nest. This meeting is not a disciplinary hearing. It is the final act of a conspiracy. The betrayal, my son, is yours." "This is absurd," Isabel interjected, her iron composure finally cracking. Her voice was sharp, a half-octave too high. "He is being manipulated. This girl, this waitress, has twisted his mind." "Miss Rossi has indeed twisted something," Silas said, his gaze seeming to penetrate the screen and lock onto Isabel. "She has twisted the lens just enough for me to see the truth that I had only suspected. She found the pattern in your chaos. Miss Rossi, the floor is yours. Present your findings." It was the moment. The air crackled with anticipation. Clara stood, her legs trembling, but her spine a rod of steel. She walked the length of that impossibly long table, the sound of her sensible, off-the-rack heels a stark contrast to Isabel's designer clicks. She felt the eyes of every person in the room on her, a physical weight. She reached the head of the table and, without looking at Marcus or Isabel, inserted her thumb drive into the console. The fabricated emails vanished, replaced by the stark, clinical interface of the Foundation's server logs. "You're right, Isabel," Clara began, her voice steady and clear, carrying across the silent room. She turned to face her accuser directly. "I am a waitress, and being a waitress teaches you a very specific skill set. It teaches you to observe. It teaches you to remember details under pressure. It teaches you to see the patterns that other people are too busy to notice." She clicked a key. A column of data appeared. For instance, a waitress notices when a customer has a tell, a specific time they always arrive, a particular way they always pay. On October 12th, at precisely 2:15 a.m., a grant for $1.2 million was approved for a company called Future Gen Innovators. The approval used the credentials of a junior accountant, Mr. Peterson, a man who, according to his employment records, lives in New Jersey and is pathologically afraid of working past 6 p.m. She paused, letting the information settle. The IP address that authorized this transfer, 73.02.1145.91, does not trace to New Jersey. It traces to a penthouse apartment in Tribeca. Your penthouse, Miss Vance. A collective gasp went through the room. Clara clicked again. Another entry appeared. November 8th, 2:15 a.m. A $1.5 million grant to Viridian Dynamics. Same accountant. Same time. Same IP address. December 4th, Solstice Technologies. January 19th, Elysian Ventures. Over and over. The names change, but the pattern remains. All are shell corporations, funneling their funds directly to a holding company, Argent Innovations. You didn't make a mistake, Isabel. You got comfortable. You got arrogant. You created a routine, because routines are efficient, and your efficiency became your signature. She turned from Isabel's horrified face to the stunned board members. This wasn't a blackmail attempt. It was a heist, a systematic, meticulously planned, multi-million-dollar embezzlement, orchestrated from a laptop in the middle of the night by Marcus Blackwood and Isabel Vance. The silence that followed was absolute, profound. It was the sound of an empire cracking at its foundations. Marcus stood frozen, his face a grotesque mask of disbelief and terror. Isabel stared at Clara, her beautiful features contorted by a hatred so pure it was almost sublime. "You insignificant little charity case," Isabel hissed, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper that was somehow more terrifying than a shout. "You were nothing, a piece of dust we brushed off our shoes. We gave you a world." "You gave me a ledger that didn't balance," Clara countered, her voice ringing with a power she had never known she possessed. "And you taught me that the most important numbers aren't written in ink. They're hidden in the patterns." From the screen, Silas Blackwood delivered the coup de grace. His voice was quiet, weary, but final. "Garrett, please escort my son and Ms. Vance to the lobby. I believe several gentlemen from the district attorney's white-collar crime division are waiting to ask them about their unorthodox philanthropic methods." As Garrett and two other security men materialized and moved towards the head of the table, as Marcus began to babble incoherently, and Isabel sat, for the first time, utterly still and defeated, Silas addressed his board. "It appears," he rasped, "we have several vacancies on our executive committee, and a pressing need for a new chair of the Audit and Oversight Committee, someone who sees what is, not what they are told to see." His eyes, pixelated but piercing, found Clara's. "The position is yours, Miss Rossi. Salary and authority to be commensurate with the extreme difficulty of the task, effective immediately." Silas Blackwood clung to life for 6 more months, a period of ferocious, focused activity. He wielded his remaining time like a scalpel, working with Clara from his penthouse command center to excise the cancer his family had seeded within his legacy. He was not a warm mentor. Warmth was not in his vocabulary. He was a master craftsman teaching his final apprentice. He taught her not with platitudes, but with brutal case studies from his own past. He made her deconstruct his most ruthless takeovers, his most brilliant market predictions. "Never fall in love with the asset, Clara," he told her one afternoon, his voice thin as parchment as they reviewed the foundation's portfolio. "People get sentimental. They see a hospital wing with their name on it. I see a depreciating asset with high overhead. You must be the cold, clear water that washes away the sentiment. Your only loyalty is to the numbers and to the purpose they serve. The purpose is the only thing that isn't for sale." He forced her to fire half the executive team, men and women who had been with him for decades, but whose complacency had allowed the rot to fester. He made her defend her decisions to him, picking apart her logic, forcing her to be more ruthless, more precise. He was forging her into the guardian his empire required, sharpening her analytical mind into a weapon. In return, she gave him something he hadn't had in years, an intellectual equal who was not a rival. She brought him the truth, unvarnished, and he respected her for it. His death, when it came, was as quiet and controlled as his life had been. Clara was with him, reading aloud a complex arbitrage report from the Financial Times. He simply closed his eyes, as if falling asleep in the middle of a calculation. The reading of the will was a tectonic event. Marcus and the rest of the Blackwoods were given a trust fund, generous by any normal standard, but a pittance in their world, a gilded cage designed to keep them comfortable and powerless for the rest of their lives. The entirety of Silas Blackwood's vast fortune, his controlling interest in the capital firm, and the $20 billion foundation was placed into an irrevocable, newly chartered trust. Silas knew that to simply give it to Clara would be to paint a target on her back for the rest of her life. So he built her a fortress. The trust was to be governed by a 3-person board. one seat permanently held by a representative from the New York Attorney General's office, a second by the sitting dean of Columbia Business School, the third, the chairmanship, holding ultimate veto power and lifetime tenure, was granted to its inaugural appointee, Clara Rossi. She had not inherited his money. She had inherited his power, his purpose, and the crushing weight of his life's work. The months that followed were a disorienting blur of legal battles, asset liquidation, and the slow, arduous process of rebuilding. Marcus and Isabel, facing overwhelming evidence, pleaded guilty to lesser charges, escaping long prison sentences, but stripped of their wealth and social standing. They became ghosts, footnotes in financial blogs. But Clara felt their presence, a lingering shadow at the edge of her new life. Her first board meeting as chair was in the same mahogany tomb where she had been tried and vindicated. She sat in the seat her mentor had once occupied. The charcoal suit was gone, replaced by one tailored to her own skin. But the feeling of being an imposter was a low, constant hum beneath the surface. The woman from the AG's office and the distinguished professor from Columbia looked at her with a potent mixture of awe and professional skepticism. She was a legend, a myth from a Wall Street journal long read. But now she had to govern. She moved her mother from the cramped walk-up in Queens to a sun-drenched brownstone with a garden and a team of the world's best neurological specialists. One cool autumn evening, a year to the day since she had saved Silas's life, she sat with Elena in that garden. Her mother's hands, steadier now than they had been in a decade, were carefully pruning a rose bush. "He saw the numbers inside you, Cara Mia," Elena said softly, not looking up from her work. Her voice was strong, the tremors all but gone. "All your life, you tried to make them fit, to balance the columns." He was the first person to understand that your gift wasn't to make things balance. It was to see why they don't. Later that night, alone in her quiet, minimalist apartment overlooking Central Park, a space that still felt borrowed, Clara sat at her desk. Spread before her were the initial proposals for the Foundation's first major new undertaking under her leadership, a sweeping program to fund public-private partnerships developing accessible diagnostic tools for neurodegenerative diseases. It was a puzzle of immense complexity, a web of finance, science, and logistics. It was personal. Her phone vibrated with a secured message from Garrett, who had seamlessly transitioned into the head of her personal security detail. Routine sweep flagged increased online chatter from accounts linked to Vance's family. Low level, but they haven't forgotten. Vigilance is advised. Clara read the message, the familiar chill of fear touching her for a moment. But it was different now. It was not the panicked fear of a cornered animal, but the cold, clear awareness of a player on the board. The game had not ended with her victory. It had simply reset with her as a queen instead of a pawn. The threats would always be there. The vultures would always circle power. She put the phone down and looked back at the proposal. Her eyes scanned the columns of figures, the projections, the cost-benefit analyses. Then she saw it. A tiny anomaly, a rounding inconsistency in the third-party logistics budget, a mere 0.05%, but one that, when extrapolated across the 5-year plan, amounted to millions of dollars in potential waste. It was the umami dust. She picked up a heavy, perfectly balanced fountain pen, a gift from Silas's estate. It was no longer the brutal arithmetic of survival she was calculating. It was the mathematics of legacy. With a steady hand, she circled the discrepancy, the ink a stark, definitive black against the page. The work was just beginning.